Welcome into episode 2 of the Women's Basketball Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things WNBA, women's college basketball, and oh so much more. I am Mia O'Brien, joined as always by the one, the only Mitchell Northam up in North Carolina. I am in Jacksonville, Florida, and we have you covered coast to coast because, Mitch, college basketball is back. I know you covered some games on the women's and men's side on Monday night for the tip-off to the 2024-2025 season. I was covering the University of Florida men taking on USF, an emotional game following Amir Abdur-Rahim, the head coach of USF's tragic passing. Ended up being a dandy of a game between two teams that, of course, were in the top 25 much of last year. We're not here to talk men's basketball. We're going to talk women's hoops as we do each and every show. But I do have to ask, Cooper Flagg, is he actually the truth?
I don't know if he's the truth, but he's really good. It was fun watching him, throw down a couple of tomahawk jams last night. And also fun, before that I was in Carmichael Arena seeing the new look North Carolina Tar Heels women's team, watching them. So, yeah, got some of Duke, got some of Carolina yesterday. We have games to talk about, which is awesome.
We love reacting to games here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. Before we do, I do have a little lead off to today's show. The only thing that we will debate more than Paige Bueckers versus Juju Watkins for Player of the Year by the AP, by every major awards group out there. Do people enjoy this snack during this time of the year, Mitch Northam?
Those are candy corns. I think they're fine. I guess maybe it's like a hot take that I'm indifferent towards candy corn. I think you're supposed to be you're supposed to hate them or you're supposed to love them. I think they're fine. Am I going to go out of my way to eat candy corn? No. If someone offers me candy corn, will I probably eat one or two pieces? Yeah, probably. I think they're fine.
Well, I keep them out on the kitchen counter just as like a, hey, if you're walking through and you just want to grab a handful, why not? Kind of like M&Ms or mints or whatever you may. And it's the perfect way to say goodbye to Halloween, say hello to Thanksgiving, hello to Feast Week, winter, holiday season, and of course, college basketball season. As we do each and every program, let's lead off with our Her of the Week nominees. For you, Mitch, who was her this week in the world of women's basketball?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to speak to the greater public here. I try to tell you all about Fairfield. I try to tell you all about them Stags. I try to tell you about Carly Thibault-Dudanis. This is a legit good team. This is one of the best 25 teams in the country, full stop. And so the coach of the Stags this week, Carly, she's my Her of the Week. To go into an SEC team's gym and not just pull off an upset, but to win by double figures, it's wildly impressive. But real talk, like, we shouldn't be surprised. This is a team that had a 29-game win streak last season. Its only losses were to Vanderbilt and Indiana. Fairfield brought back 4 starters, 91% of its scoring from last season. There's a reason why Carly signed a contract extension and turned down overtures from major conference programs to stay at Fairfield. It's because she's got something special cooking there. And there's a reason why Fairfield had a tough time filling out its non-conference schedule, because Power 4 programs don't want to play them. The two stats that jumped out to me, again, this is Fairfield going into Arkansas and beating the Hogs handedly. They went 13 of 30 from three-point land. That's a 43% clip, and out-rebounding Arkansas 40-31. Again, for a team from the MAC, I feel like I have to extend the A's there because we got 2 A's in the acronym there. So the MAC, to do that in an SEC gym, just incredible. I'm looking at the rest of Fairfield's schedule, and they play a few more major conference teams this season in Oklahoma State, Wake Forest, Villanova, St. John's. Those are all winnable games for the Stags, and those all might be games that Fairfield should be favored in, especially Wake Forest. They should definitely be favored in that game. I would say this is a note for gamblers because Vegas isn't still really sure how to set lines on women's college basketball. If you see Fairfield as an underdog, you might want to check that out. I voted for Fairfield.
Are they the new Florida Gulf Coast? Is it fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. I think they're in the new Florida Gulf Coast and the new Princeton. I think they are the new mid-major power in this sport. Again, like the long winning streak last season, going into the tournament, 29 games in a row. Again, only 2 losses last year, and they're bringing everybody back. So I feel like they have the guns and the pieces necessary to like make another run at this year. Like if they win, 25 plus games again and like win a game in the tournament, we shouldn't be surprised. I voted for Fairfield in my preseason AP Top 25 poll at 25th, and I hope other voters join me next week.
You predicted that Fairfield would make a statement early on last week's show, which of course was our conference preview show, Halloween edition. So make sure you go check that out on our Linktree and wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, right here on the OG Triangle Media YouTube channel. You also said that Ole Miss might be a bit of a raisin or a disappointment in the SEC. We're going to circle back to that, Mitch. Not so sure.
We'll get back to that.
Yeah, not so sure that prediction panned out quite like you did, at least in a one-game sample size. My her of the week is Olivia Miles. The backcourt for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish was something we talked about last week as well, Mitch. And it's a storyline we'll be following all season long here on the Women's Basketball Podcast because we still don't know, with all due respect to Mercyhurst, because it's not exactly the most ferocious of an opponent for the Fighting Irish. We know that it's going to take some time for Hannah Hidalgo, Olivia Miles to gel in that backcourt, or at least that's what logic would suggest. I think with Miles' injury that kept her sidelined last season, and because of the hype surrounding Hidalgo as a true freshman last year, I think people honestly just forgot that Olivia Miles existed. Now you have both of them in the backcourt. Miles goes off for a triple-double. Yes, that's a triple-double, folks. 20 points, 10 boards, 10 assists. She's back. She is my her of the week.
Yeah, I mean, a year and a half without playing and your first game back, you drop a triple-double. You mess around and get a triple-double. Pretty impressive. Awesome return to see Olivia Miles back on the court.
And it'll be a storyline to watch all season long. Again, I'm very curious. You can drop 105 against Mercyhurst, yes. A little bit stiffer of a challenge at Purdue. I think the Big Ten in general made a statement on Monday as they proved that maybe the conference will be deeper than many expected. But hey, Notre Dame gets a real test on November the 23rd when they do play number 3. USC. Let's dive into this week's starting 5. Following our her of the week, if you're new to the program, we always lead off with our 5 biggest stories or characters this week in women's basketball. Last week, Mitch led us off. He had 3 of our starting 5. So this week we flip it. It's my turn to lead off with the starting 5. And Mitch will pivot briefly away from college basketball to the WNBA because, man, oh man, last week we just referenced the coaching carousel and the 7 openings, head coaching vacancies in the W. It felt like the domino that had to fall first was Stephanie White. Would she go home to Indiana, as so many predicted? Would she want to join what she called a generational, a historic point guard center combination in Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston? People are hyped, rightfully so. I'm curious what you think of this pairing. And of course, without getting into too much of the drama of what led to Stephanie White's parting with the Connecticut Sun on mutual terms and landing back with the Fever.
Yeah, as it turned out, we were right. Stephanie White is there with the Indiana Fever now. As I said last week, Christy Sides got Manny Diaz. But yeah, I think, it's probably a good hire. I think like Stephanie White talked about in her press conference, the margins in the WNBA in terms of like winning a championship and that window to capitalize on trying to win a championship, they're pretty small. So I think like in year 1, when Caitlin Clark, and Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell kind of power you to the playoffs, you're like, okay, well, all 3 of those are going to be better next year, you would think, especially Caitlin after, finally getting some time to relax and take a break. Sounds like she might play some golf this offseason. Will she play some other form of basketball? TBD. We will see.
We may hit on that too later in the starting 5.
Yeah. The one thing that felt super notable to me in Stephanie White's opening press conference was that she called Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell the core 3 of the Fever. So if you want to read between the lines a little bit there, I think that probably means that someone like a Nalissa Smith is not going to be around much longer in Indiana. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting offseason all the way around, not just because of all the coaching changes in the WNBA, but because we have an expansion draft and the CBA is getting renegotiated and free agency. And like, it's going to be a silly season for sure.
And I haven't checked, but since we will also be talking about some social media super sleuthing later in the starting five, did Alyssa Smith change her Instagram bio again? Does it have WNBA? Does it say Indiana Fever? Does it say nothing at all? Yeah, there's been a lot of cryptic social media action from the former number 2 overall pick.
Indeed. I think we're in for an interesting offseason.
All right, at the 2 in this week's starting five, Mitchell Northam puts out onto the floor.
So I'm going to stick in the mid-major ranks. I'm going to stick in the Northeast, and I'm going to stick in the MAC. Mia, did you
Which,
know
by the way,
that...
I do cover Mason Smith, formerly of the LSU Tigers, now the Jacksonville Jaguars, who has 2 A's in his name. So I greatly appreciate the MAC.
Yeah. We're talking about the MAC today. So Mia, did you know that Nika Mule of UConn fame has a younger sister?
I did not know that, but I do love Nika Mule. Tell me more, Mitch.
Neither did I until last night. And Hannah Mule is an absolute bucket. She plays for the Manhattan Jaspers, and they came within 6 points of upsetting Rutgers last night, largely because of Hannah Mule, who had 28 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, and 2 steals. Career high in points for her, a 5'8" guard from Croatia. And I think I was unaware of Hannah Mule because for whatever reason, she was buried on the bench at Ball State for the past 2 years, playing 11 minutes per game. It's clear to me after doing this last night against a Big Ten team that she can play, and she's a big-time player. And I think Ball State's loss is Manhattan's gain, and it's our gain because now we get to watch Hannah Mule play 30 minutes or whatever, and we get to watch her ball out in the mid-major ranks this season. Like
in the MAC.
Yeah, in the MAC. Let's look, Fairfield, Manhattan, early game to watch. We gotta circle that on the calendar. We gotta find that one.
I love that. I also think it's interesting that she comes to Manhattan from somewhere in the Midwest, wherever Ball State is. No offense, Indiana. And now she comes to the New York metropolitan area. Obviously, Storrs, Connecticut, not too far away. I'm not saying, but I'm saying she's in Gino's backyard. If we want a family reunion, that's certainly on the table. My final question with regards to Hannah Mule is, why is she Hannah, but Nika is Nika? I don't really think of Hannah as a native Croatian name. But hey, I'm here for it.
I hope I'm not mispronouncing it, but it's Hana. So I think that's Hannah.
Unless it's Hannah.
I'm right on that.
Hannah. Yeah.
But someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, apologies to Mrs. Mule.
Yes, make sure that you leave a comment as well if you are enjoying the women's basketball show. We'd love to hear from you guys as we roll on in this week's starting five. Unrivaled, we alluded to it earlier, got the bump up to 36 players in the last week since we last spoke to you guys. Originally, of course, the 3-on-3 women's basketball league was supposed to just be 10 teams of 3, but now each roster will have 6 teams. Of course, Nafisa Collier, Brianna Stewart leading the charge as the co-founders of the league. Mitch, what do you think this will mean in terms of, number one, who the final 6 spots are? Because certainly there were those speculating online that with Kate Martin, number 28 in the addition to Unrivaled, with Lexi Hall, 29, there was much speculation that, it would only suggest logically that one Caitlin Clark would be number 30. Instead, it's her teammate, Aaliyah Boston, but now 6 spots still remain in Unrivaled.
I think going back to my gambling point earlier, if someone ran a line on whether or not Caitlin Clark is going to play an Unrivaled this season, I'd probably say yeah. Considering those
minus money. Are we saying minus money?
Yeah, maybe like minus 150. I think the odds are decent. I feel like those last couple picks are kind of like the super friends of Caitlin Clark, joining Unrivaled. But I think the fact that they are bumping up the number of roster spots that they're going to have this year, that probably means that they have more investment than they thought they were going to have in year one. And that probably means they can pay a little bit more and they can pay more players, which is good. That's great all around. Even if Caitlin doesn't play, I think it's going to be a super interesting thing to watch. Just an all women's 3-on-3 league. I think Team USA just announced like their camp for Team USA basketball for 3-on-3 for kind of the development for the next cycle, figuring out, that next FIBA team, that next Olympic team. getting back to that gold medal status. So yeah, more 3-on-3. I'm here for it.
And I'm not going to lie. Caitlin Clark rolled up to Stephanie White's presser in sweats. Looked a little chilly outside there in Indianapolis this time of year. Mitch, it's November 5th. It's already too chilly up there in the Midwest. I would think that the thought of playing in South Florida, living in South Florida, if only for during the week for 2-3 months out of the year, it's got to be a little fun, right? I mean, maybe that's something that Caitlin Clark would consider. I know she wants to be being there at Butler, since Connor McCaffrey, of course, has taken Greg Oden's spot on the bench for on Thad Matta's staff at Butler University in Indianapolis. And his brother, Patrick McCaffrey, will be on the team this year. Respect to being around your family. I'm sure she wants to get back to Des Moines, see the rest of the family there. I would come down here to Florida, if only for 2 months out of the year. That's just me, though.
Yeah, especially those couple months out of the year where it's going to be brutally cold in Indiana. And, someone who spent all their life in Iowa, I imagine, you're probably used to the winter, but, get down to Florida for a little bit. Might not be too bad.
And you get to, like you said, hang out with the super friends. Why would you not want to just hang out with Kate Martin more and hang out with Lexi Hull more? I guess she already is, and their viral Sips TikTok videos just keep on coming. All right, let's keep going with this week's starting five. Mitch, your final pick of the week.
Yeah. So we got a new coach at Stanford. Kate Pay makes her debut. Stanford wins in dominant fashion, 107-43 over Lemoyne. What was notable to me is they hit a program record 18 3-pointers. Now it's Lemoyne, right? They didn't do this against South Carolina or UConn.
Go Dolphins.
But still, to hit a program record at a place with as much history and success as Stanford, I think that's super notable and noteworthy. Janiyah Harrell made 6 of 9 from deep. Alina Boscano went 4 of 6 from deep. I think what we can take away from this is that Stanford style under Kate Pay is going to be a fast-paced one that emphasizes the three-point shot. Last season, this was a team that was 146th nationally in three-point rate. I would expect that figure to be a whole lot higher this year if the first game is any indicator. I think it's worth noting that Pay was a pretty good shooter herself in college, knocking down 39% from deep as a senior for the Cardinal. But yeah, I think a lot of people sort of overlook Stanford this year. They weren't ranked in the preseason AP poll. But I think they are going to be competitive. I think you can expect them to finish in the top half of the ACC, and we should expect them to be a tournament team this year and beat some teams that we probably didn't expect them to.
So here in Jacksonville, we, of course, have the University of North Florida, affectionately on the men's side known as the Birds of Trey, as they have led the NCAA in three-point shooting on the men's side for much of the last decade plus. Erica Lambert came in last year to lead the women's side. She is also trying to emulate a three-point shooting emphasis, style, identity, if you may, and that's unrelated to Matthew Driscoll's outfit. So if they're the Birds of Trey, what are we going to call Stanford now? I have to ask. We have to come up with something if they're going to be shooting them at this sort of crazy pace.
The Trees of Prey.
The trees of Trey. The Trees of Trey.
Trees of Trey.
The Trees of Trey.
We got it. The Trees of Trey.
Or threes.
That's both of those are good. I think Trees of Prey. Or wait, hold on. Trees.
See,
of
look
Trey.
at that.
See, we got this. Trees of Trey.
We're workshopping in real time. I threw that one up.
We did it.
I threw the lob up. You slammed it on down. Let's finish off this week's starting five with that social media super sleuthing that I was alluding to.
Yeah.
Look, Mitch, at this point in time, I respect the bit. I respect Asia Wilson and Bam Adebayo's dedication to their privacy. But when she is showing up mysteriously at every Miami Heat function, when Bam is being given the key to the city, and the only person outside of his immediate family who is in attendance is Asia Wilson. And now we have Mark Jones, legendary ESPN play-by-play guy. And honestly, I don't know if it was intentional or not, calling the Miami Heat game earlier this week and posts a selfie and says, look who it is, the best in the world. Asia Wilson's here for the Miami Heat game. It's funny, but how much longer can we keep this bit going?
Maybe they're just really good friends.
Possible. they've got great handshakes and like secret handshakes. So
I think it's a thing. I think it's safe to say it's a thing.
I just don't know why the cover up. I mean, I respect privacy, but like you're both two amazing basketball players, very attractive human beings. Like I just, I guess they like the content. Listen, the NBA is all about the content. The WNBA is not far behind when it comes to creating the content and creating the on and off the court drama. And this isn't drama. This is just funny at this point, and I'm happy for them. But I'm also like, man, I just want to know if Mark Jones knew and he's like messing with us, or Mark Jones just innocently was like, "Oh my goodness, Asia Wilson, the MVP," and just
maybe he's in on the bit. I think it's a bit at this point. I think, and like, let's keep it going. Let's, why not?
Well, let's keep this episode going with our reaction to opening night in women's college basketball. I laid out a couple of games for us to get into. Of course, the first three of which go without saying. You knew we were going to get into these, which we have to begin with the Parisian games, those two games, that doubleheader that began the day of college basketball beginning at noon with Juju Watkins at USC facing Ole Miss. I told you we would get back to it, Mitch. We had to pick a candy or a raisin last week, which AKA is, our rose and our thorn, something that we have questions about, something we are very, very excited to come in each conference in the Power Four, the mid-majors. And for your raisin, you said you had questions about Coach Yo and Ole Miss. What did they prove to you in Monday's game?
Look, right now, I still stand by my raisin thing, just because of how that game ended. I mean, you had the ball with 9 seconds left, and you had the chance to win the game, and the out-of-bounds design was not what you want. I don't know what the design was, but they didn't even get the ball out of the corner before USC forced a turnover, and off they went. But look, I think, to on a neutral court in Paris, environment you're unfamiliar with, this USC team has a lot of hype, the expected player of the year on their roster and Juju Watkins. I think to play them that closely and to come within 2 points of upsetting them, on the first day of the season, I think that's impressive for sure. And it probably, I think it says a lot about their defense that they were able to hang with USC for as long as they did. I mean, they held the Trojans to 1 of 11 from 3-point land. That's a 9% clip. That is not what you want if you're USC. But, to play USC that closely, on the other side, Ole Miss only shot 29% from the floor. So I think there's still a lot to be wanted out of Ole Miss offensively. They also missed 6 free throws, not what you want, especially when you only lose by 2 points. But yeah, I think they're going to be a solid team. I'm looking, this was a chance for them to take that next step. And I think that was like the point I was trying to get at when I picked them as my raisin in our Halloween game, was like, when is Ole Miss going to take that next step? And I just wasn't sure who was going to take that step for them in terms of who was going to be the star player to kind of lead them to that point. But yeah, really good showing. I mean, if there's, anything to take away from a loss that you're proud of, I think they played really good defensively. You just would have liked that result to have been differently if you're Ole Miss, for sure.
USC gets the win in Paris, 68-66 in the race to 69. On the flip side of this matchup, Mitch, Kiki Rice goes for 22. Juju Watkins goes for 27. Rice plays 32 minutes. Juju plays the entire game. 22 plus 27, that's 49 points. USC scored 68 points. Is this what Lindsey Gottlieb's squad is just simply going to look like in 2024, 2025? It's just those two and role players around. I mean, it's not to say that it can't work. It certainly has worked at Iowa with Caitlin Clark and Monica Sonano the year prior, and just Caitlin Clark, and to an extent, whoever stepped up in that regards last year. And they went all the way to the national title game. So it's not to say USC can't operate with solely those two players carrying the load, but I would think at some point or another it could come back to bite them.
Yeah, it's a really weird box score. If you just go to ESPN and look at some of the numbers and stuff, Rhea Marshall plays 34 minutes and attempts 1 shot and scores 0 points. Rhea Marshall is a really good inside post player. Talia von Oelhoffen in her debut for USC, just 2 points. That's not what you want either. I'm not sure if the best version of this USC team is Juju Watkins being the primary ball handler all the time, which is largely what she was in this game against Ole Miss. Yeah, she had 27 points and 10 rebounds, but she also had 9 turnovers. And I'm just not sure if that's the best recipe for success for them. I think you would like to have someone else on the floor who can set her up and let her play off the ball and, run some pick and roll with Rhea Marshall and, get Kiki Rice off and going as well. So, yeah, they squeaked this one out in Paris, but it's clear to me that they still have some things to work out and some things to figure out with the roster.
Yeah, 26 turnovers for USC. That's obviously something they'll have to clean up, especially as they head into the new Big Ten and Big Ten play. Was there anything else that stood out for you from this game one in Paris before we get to the second game of that doubleheader?
Just one thing. There was a moment in this game where Juju Watkins got teed up for essentially staring down and talking a little trash to Kennedy Todd Williams after blocking her shot. And we have to stop with these weak technical fouls in women's college basketball. We don't do this in men's basketball, y'all. Just let them play. Let them.
Although they have definitely started to cut down on the gimme that. Anytime a player says gimme that, now in men or women, it's like the end of the world.
It's fine. Let them have personality. We talk all the time about how, the two players who poured rocket fuel into the growth of the sport were Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. And you know what both of them have? Personality and an affinity for talking shit. And as fans, we love that. So to the refs, y'all just got to grow up, and we're not tuning in to see y'all tee someone up. We're here to see Juju Watkins and others walk the walk and talk the talk. So just officiate the game and not the personalities. And I just feel like staring someone down and just talking a little bit after a block, just let it go. It's fine.
Was TV Teddy calling this game? I'm just kidding. I
would love to see TV Teddy in women's basketball if he's ever up for it.
I mean, if he gets pushed out of enough Power 4 conferences on the men's side, maybe, possibly. I mean, I guess the same folks run both conferences, but that's a story for another time. To the second game of this doubleheader in Paris, another goodie. Shout out to the Parisians. Shout out to the French. They keep delivering. We keep moving the opener overseas, and they keep getting great basketball. So hopefully they keep bringing the American women's basketball game back over there to Paris. UCLA ekes one out as well. Both of the Southern California squads able to pick up wins in Paris. They defeat Louisville 66-59. Let's start big picture here, Mitch. This, as we've talked about, is a Louisville team that is young. You can go up and down their roster, and you're going to recognize a lot of the last names. Jeff Walls has tweaked his roster comparatively to last year. Meanwhile, for UCLA, this is a lot of the same characters for Corey Close. What did you see from both squads?
Yeah, I mean, for Louisville, we talked about it last week a little bit, how old they make me feel because of the names and all the freshmen and everything else. But, this is a team with 8 freshmen on it. And I think for a team this young to hang that tough in game one with a UCLA team that has aspirations of going to the Final Four, I think that's a good sign for things to come for the Cardinals. Now, UCLA didn't have Kiki Rice, and if they did, maybe this game is a little wider in the margins. But for Louisville, it seems like to me they have a solid backcourt partnership in. I'm gonna try this name, Tajiana Roberts. I think I got it. Anyway, she had 21 points and 0 turnovers in her first college basketball game, and that's awesome. And the veteran Miami transfer, Jalea Williams, she had 11 points and 9 assists. So I feel like they have a good backcourt pairing going on. I feel like they figured that out. Now you just have to figure out which players complement them the best and how you can put those other players in a position to succeed. So I think it's going to be, Louisville is going to take some bumps early, but I think by the time the season's over, they're going to have some things figured out. They're going to be playing meaningful games in March. For UCLA, my big takeaway was Lauren Betts played really, really well in a game where, frankly, she had to play really, really well for them to get a win because you don't have Kiki Rice and you're going up against a pretty good Louisville team. She comes out, she shoots 9 of 12 from the floor, 18 points, 13 boards, 5 assists. She leads the team in scoring, rebounding, and assists. and block shots. She has 4 of those too. So, Lauren Betts, if she can kind of blossom into the All-American that we think she can be this year, that will be a great thing for UCLA in terms of where they want to go as a program.
Hot take, and I promise this is not just because of the behind-the-scenes documentary style 3-part intertwined story that, of course, was going on behind the scenes of last college basketball season, in which Caitlin Clark, Camila Cardoso, and Kiki Rice had camera crews following their every move. I love Kiki Rice, her story, how she's developed into not only a competitor on the court, but off the court, mentally, physically, emotionally, and how transparent she was fascinating to see. Obviously, she comes from a family of certain political power, influence. I mean, the microscope has been on her from such a young age, both athletically and because of her aunt, of course, working in the United States politics. I do have questions, though. Is she the alpha dog for UCLA?
That is a fair question because
I think Lauren Betts is the alpha, and we saw it when they played without her last season.
And for Kiki Rice's first 2 years at UCLA, the alpha dog was, for the most part, Charisma Osborne. So yeah, I think that's a fair question. Is she the top dog? Is she the leader on the team, or is she a really good player but a complementary piece to another star on the team? I think Lauren Betts can be that. She dealt with some things last year and missed some time as well. So yeah, we just haven't seen it all come together for this UCLA team quite yet. I thought last season they were on a roll at one point. Going into January, they were undefeated. They were right up there with South Carolina. And then they dealt with some injuries and some other things.
I was going to say, then Lauren Betts got hurt.
Fair, yeah. I think
that's where that behind the scenes that ESPN gave us the access to that maybe we didn't realize in the moment. And again, it's literally like it's a director's cut. They're showing us as much as they possibly can in X amount of minutes of an episodic series on ESPN. And granted, it's ESPN Plus, so maybe there's not like an exact limit of time. But my biggest takeaway, not even Caitlin Clark, Camila Cardoso, those were great stories. My biggest takeaway from that entire series, Mitch, was I'm excited to see where Kiki Rice continues to grow because I see her putting in the work. But the comparison that I would make, and it's funny because obviously Lauren Betts is the forward and, Kiki Rice is the point guard in this situation. The comparison I would make, and I've made this in multiple sports to multiple teams, the Minnesota Timberwolves drafted Karl Anthony Towns, #1 overall. He was the face of the franchise up until he was traded to the New York Knicks this offseason. Cat undoubtedly was one of the, if not the best player on all of those Minnesota Timberwolves teams that he was on the roster for, and he was certainly the face of the team. But not until they drafted Anthony Edwards #1 overall, and quite frankly, not even until they brought in the veteran Mike Conley to play alongside him, did I really see the alpha dog emerge on the Timberwolves, and that alpha dog was not Karl Anthony Towns. He certainly was one of the 2 best players on the floor when he was putting everything together, and he certainly was the face of the franchise, but he was not that guy who's going to get in your face, be the vocal leader. And I don't even think you have to be quite as brash as Anthony Edwards to be that alpha dog, but you have to be, in baseball terms, the Juan Soto, right? Aaron Judge is the face of the Yankees. He's the captain. But Juan Soto is that guy who's going to have a killer at bat that's going to, quite frankly, scare the pitcher out of his socks so that when Aaron Judge comes up and he's already allowed Juan Soto to get on base, he's already shook. That's what Anthony Edwards is. I think that's who Lauren Betts is, not Kiki Rice, but hopefully I get proven wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you just reminded me, last season, I think people who follow me on Twitter know this, but, I spent all last season with the North Carolina Tar Heels, and I was in, film sessions and practices and stuff like this for a book that's going to come out at some point whenever the publisher gives me a date. But we'll reach that point.
We will be bringing that up at the end of the program. Don't you worry.
Yeah. So North Carolina scrimmaged against UCLA last season in sort of one of those closed door secret scrimmages. And I was in the film session for that, before that game. And then I was in the meeting that the coaches had afterwards. And I got to tell you, Kiki Rice was not at the top of the scouting report. Like, the coaches kind of know what she is. They were like, turn her she loves to get
Force
to
her to
the
turn the ball
basket.
over. Yep.
Yeah, she loves to get to the basket. She loves to get downhill. She loves to drive. If she wants to sit out on the perimeter and take some 3-point shots, let her, because for the most part, they don't go in with any consistency. So I think if you're Kiki Rice, like, that's the thing you got to work on, is becoming a knockdown 3-point shooter. They were really more concerned with Lauren Betts because, like, she's a giant, and Charisma Osborne because she had all these skills as a ball handler. So last year, anyways, when those three were kind of the top dogs, Kiki Rice was number 3 on opposing team scouting reports. So I think that's notable. And yeah, so for UCLA to get to where do they want to go, we got to see both of those players kind of step up.
Meanwhile, for Louisville, did the game in Paris change your perception of what this young Jeff Walz team can be in 2024, 2025?
I don't know if it changed it. I thought that, despite all the new faces and all the freshmen, like, Jeff Walz has been doing this a long time. I thought that, like, he would figure it out. So yeah, it was a really good showing for them. When I saw that, again, going back to the gambling thing, when I saw that the line was plus 10.5 for Louisville against a UCLA team, like you mentioned, without Kiki Rice, I was like, they're going to cover. That's going to be a Jeff Walz cover. That's going to happen. And they did. And yeah, I think that, like I said, I think they have a really good backcourt. They just kind of have to figure out the best roles for all these new different pieces that they have. And I think by the time they get to ACC play, they'll have a better idea of what everything looks like.
I think we're going to need to add a segment that's like make money with Mitch or something, like right off the top. Maybe we will add that to when we do the set the chef's table a little bit later in the program. Before we pivot to the number 1 team in the country, Mitch, do we have any update on this Kiki Rice apparent mysterious injury that I don't think anybody knew about until the injury report came out, right?
No, I didn't know she
Yeah.
wasn't playing until, a few minutes or an hour before that game.
The beauty of college athletics, by the way, that it's just like, oh yeah, no, they have an injury.
Yeah, I'm looking at some Twitter feeds for UCLA beat writers, and there's really not any details about what the injury is. So yeah, unclear about what exactly it is and how long she'll be out.
Interesting. Well, that's certainly a storyline that we will be following here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. A storyline we're always following. Dawn Staley, the South Carolina Gamecocks, are the number 1 team in the land, but they certainly got a scare out in Las Vegas on opening night. 68-62 the final. They eke out a win over the Michigan Wolverines. I said it earlier in the show, Mitch. I do think the depth of the Big Ten and its growth over the last 5 to 6 years is going to be showcased this year, whether that's the likes of Purdue, Michigan State, Nebraska taking the next step, or in the case of a Michigan team that's always been feisty, but certainly brought South Carolina and a depleted front court to the brink on Monday night.
Yeah, this is the second podcast where I'm going to mention Shaq, because when it comes to Syla Swords, I feel like the meme where he's like, I apologize, I wasn't familiar with your game. Because look, I don't pay all that much attention to recruiting, so I didn't know who Syla Swords was, but I damn sure know who she is now. My friend Dano from Her Hoop Stats shared this. So this is a list of freshmen who have scored 25 points or more against Dawn Staley's Gamecocks. Here's the list: Paige Beckers, Hannah Hidalgo, Kennedy Carter, Syla Swords. Pretty good company. Pretty good company for the Michigan freshman. 27 points and 12 boards in a near upset of the reigning national champs. I think she's going to be someone who is potentially in that race, not just for the Big Ten freshman of the year, but the national freshman of the year. I think she's going to be someone that we're going to talk about. And I think Michigan is probably going to be better than a lot of people thought.
Then South Carolina. We knew that certainly the current situation of their front court was going to be fascinating because, I mean, let's just start 50. Let's start, 360 view here. South Carolina, were you impressed? Were you concerned? Were you worried? Was it simply just a good game, Mitch, where Michigan just was able to put it all together and found a way to make this, a 6-point game?
Yeah, it was kind of what the worries that I had about South Carolina surfaced, right? Coming into this season, the big thing was like, okay, who's going to play center for this team? Because all of Dawn Staley's best teams have had a dominant sort of traditional number 5 center. Asia Wilson, Aaliyah Boston, Camila Cardoso. They don't have that this year. And so, I'm watching that game. I look at the box score. The rebounding, dead even, 52-52. South Carolina got a lot of points last year off of offensive rebounding and just putting stuff back up. They also got a lot of points on making sure that they were grabbing the missed shots and then running it the other way. Rebounding was such a big part of what made them successful, and that inside scoring, that inside play. I was reading a little bit, about the game. This is from a friend of mine, Alan Cole, who writes at Gamecock Scoop. And Tessa Johnson had this quote that stood out to me. Camilla was very dominant down there. If we were struggling, we could honestly just throw it up and she would rebound or make a shot or get fouled. When she was out there, it would calm us down a little bit. It did feel a little bit different, but we don't have her anymore. So we've got to adjust to that. And to me, that was the big takeaway from last night. It was, who is going to step up and be this inside presence for South Carolina? Or if they don't have that inside presence, are they going to play a style that sort of embraces more guards and sort of small ball? And are they going to try and outrun teams? It seemed like their most sort of successful kind of lineup was having Chloe Kitts and Joyce Edwards in the front court.
Shout out Joyce Edwards. You're when we were prepping for this show once upon a time, one of our practice casts, that was one of your overreactions, that Joyce Edwards was going to be called upon early and often in her freshman season in Columbia.
Yeah, and she might be the player who, she's not a traditional 5 like a Camilla or like an Asia Wilson or an Aaliyah Boston. She's a little undersized, but I think her and Chloe Kitts together, maybe that's the right recipe and maybe that's the right formula for success for them. Now, we don't know the big question with South Carolina.
Right. You said that you did an amazing job of when I rephrase the question and I said, let's go 360. I was building towards, of course, we do not know the status of one Ashlyn Watkins. And that's what I wanted to build towards. You did a fantastic job there, Mitch, of building to, was her absence a difference maker on Monday night?
Yeah. And I think it was. I think if Ashlyn Watkins is in this game, where the rebounding margin is probably much larger in South Carolina's favor. They probably win by a more comfortable margin. We don't know if and when she's coming back. Now, she got cleared of her charges today, but we still don't know if she's coming back to the team and when that might be. So that is still very much up in the air. I'm super interested now to see. I'm going to see South Carolina in person this Sunday in Charlotte. They're going to play against NC State. That's going to be a rematch of the Final Four last year. But it's going to be a very different game because NC State has the same questions. They don't really have their center situation figured out, and they're probably going to play 4 guards, and they're probably going to play faster. So, in the Final Four last year, that win over NC State, that was a really tight game at halftime. And then in the third quarter, Camila Cardoso and Ashlyn Watkins just killed them on the glass and killed them inside. So that's going to be a fun game. I think a competitive game, but it might be a completely different game than the one we saw in Cleveland last year.
Any other games from Monday night that you want to hit, Mitch, before we set the table for what's to come the rest of this first week of the women's basketball season?
Texas A&M got upset by Texas A&M Corpus Christi, I think is, am I saying, is that the full name?
Yes, it is. And not only did the women's side get upset, but the men's side did as well by none other than the Big 12's University of Central Florida. So yeah, between that and South Carolina on the football front, absolutely whipping that Aggie, on Saturday night, man, oh man, when I got some messages from my South Carolina friends today after the University of North Florida knocked off the men's side. I'm like, man, you shouldn't be complaining up there in South Carolina. Imagine being Texas A&M right now. They are just getting beat across the board right now.
Yeah. I'm looking at the scoreboard now, and to everybody out there who tells me that the SEC is the best conference in women's basketball, Missouri lost to Vermont by double digits. We already talked about Arkansas losing by double digits to Fairfield, and Texas A&M loses on their home court to Texas A&M Corpus Christi. So I don't see any ACC teams losing to 3 mid-majors on opening day. Now the good news in the SEC, I thought, was something that was noteworthy, was just the absolute smackdown that Kentucky laid on South Carolina Upstate in their opener, Kenny Brooks' debut. They got really good games from some transfers that Kenny Brooks brought along with him. Clara Strack having a career high game, 22 points. Tiani Key making an impact, a transfer from North Carolina, and Georgia Amore with a casual double-double of 10 assists and 11 points. I think Kentucky's going to be really good this year.
Yeah, change of scenery, but more Georgia Amore. Please give
Yep.
it to me.
Yeah.
I also want to flip it over to the ACC real quick and give a shout out to Florida State, a program record 119 points. They hung on a team that I'm going to be calling games for this year, and the North Florida Ospreys. Again, it's only year 2 of Erica Lambert's tenure. They're a young team. They're trying to figure it out. Florida State only somehow, some way, despite putting up 119 points, shot 46.6%. but they shot the ball 88 times. I'm not sure I've ever seen a team in regulation shoot the ball 88 times, Mitch. So shout out to Florida State. It's an impressive number. And Tanaya Latson is somebody who I think we're going to have to keep our eye on this college basketball season. She had 27.
And Michaela Timpson, 22 rebounds, 12 on the offensive end.
Yeah.
I feel like
that, by the way, was the biggest question heading into UNF season, because Emma Browerman, their 5th-year senior, finally runs out of eligibility. She was a back-to-the-basket center for 5 seasons at North Florida. They lose her, and quite frankly, and I even have said this to Erica, they didn't really address it. They kind of just said, well, we're going to be a 3-point shooting team. It's fine. We've got some taller forwards. And they're out here trying to run with Selma Eklund, the Swede, who's what they have her listed at 6 foot flat. She's 5'11". That's their starting 5. And she's 6 flat. That's not going to fly against Florida State. I'm not sure it's even going to fly against the Florida Gulf Coast of the ASUN.
Yeah. But yeah, Tanaya Latson and Michaela Timpson are as good as a 1-2 punch you'll find in women's college basketball. The other ACC thing that just jumped out to me was we saw Toby Fournier's debut at Duke. She played 10 minutes and scored 10 points and hit this really nice turnaround fadeaway while being fouled, which was awesome. I was at North Carolina yesterday. I got to see some of their, young pieces debut. I think Blanca Thomas is going to be really good this year and a player that makes an impact for the Tar Heels. And down in Miami, Trisha Culloch won her debut, and the Cavenders are back. So
yeah, and of course, shout out to my good personal friend and my mentee, the one, the only Jazz Roberts, El Capitan. So crazy that she is in her 4th year at Miami, and of course, 2 years ago, we forget. Yes, it was a different looking roster, but the Cavenders were on it. They were in the rotation, as was Jazz when they went all the way to the Elite 8 back in 2023. A whole heck of a lot of games ahead this week, Mitch, and you've prepared a beautiful spread for us. It's not Mitch's money just yet. Maybe we'll try to get the naming rights to that in weeks ahead and episodes to come here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. But set the table for us. It's the chef's table. What game should we have our eye on over the next few days?
Yes, not a full tasting menu, but just the best of the best, the things that you should keep an eye on as in the coming days in women's college basketball. So I have an appetizer, I have an entree, and I have a dessert for you. So an appetizer, our first course, Thursday night. Got my days mixed up there. We got Harvard at 25, Indiana. The Hoosiers ranked 25th in the nation. Moving on from Mackenzie Holmes, it's a bit of a new era there, but Sydney Parrish still around, still getting buckets. This is a game to watch, I feel like, because Harvard should be one of the best teams in the Ivy League this year, and the Ivy is always one of the best mid-major leagues in the country. Harbini Turner might be one of the best players in the Ivy League. So I think that is a game that folks should keep an eye on. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern on Thursday on Big Ten Plus for the folks who get that or can stream that.
Don't you love non-conference season where we're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to be following. Oh, okay. SEC Network Plus. I get the SEC Network. I was trying to watch even last night when the UNF men took down South Carolina while I'm at the Florida USF game that's on SEC Network. And I have the game pulled up and I have the broadcast pulled up. And I'm like, what do you mean I pay for SEC Network, but I have to pay extra for SEC Network Plus? I thought because I pay for ESPN Plus. I digress. Continue with our main course.
Look, at least we're not at Flow Hoops season quite yet.
Well said.
For my entree, the main course, the game you absolutely need to watch. This is Sunday. This is 1:00 on FS1. Number 11 Duke at number 18 Maryland. This is a game that I wish I could make it to because it's a rekindling of an old ACC rivalry. Maryland now in the Big Ten, much to my chagrin. But this is going to be a really good game, and I think it's a really good test for both teams early on. You have this new look Maryland squad. You have this really young Duke team. Which team is going to kind of get the best of the other one here is going to be super interesting to watch. I'm going to have my eyes locked on this game.
I love that. Oh, Maryland Duke, the old ACC, the way that we affectionately talk about the old Big East, the fact that we have now reached this juncture where we talk about the old ACC. I don't know how you Maryland fans, how you handle this between you, my boyfriend Kevin from Maryland, Scott Van Pelt. I know this one stings a little bit in any time, whether it's men's or women's basketball, that you can rough up on the Dukies.
What I learned when I moved to North Carolina was that, while, when I was growing up in Maryland, Maryland fans, they hate North Carolina. They especially hate Duke, though.
That all goes back to early 2000s, Coach K.
Absolutely.
All that good stuff.
But Duke doesn't really think about Maryland. And North Carolina doesn't really think about Maryland. And Maryland also kind of has this problem now in the Big Ten where, they're supposed to hate Penn State. Penn State doesn't really think about Maryland. And I just...
Who does think about Maryland?
I don't know who Maryland's actual rival is anymore. And I think that's one of the problems of conference realignment.
I think maybe Rutgers, but Rutgers thinks Penn State is a rival. I mean,
yeah,
that's tough. I mean, I will tell you this: in women's basketball, because Brenda is from Cedar Rapids, you could say Iowa is a rival, and certainly the women's basketball programs have been on par for most of the last 20 some odd years that Lisa Bluter, now Jan Jensen, but of course Jan Jensen, extension of Lisa Bluter, have been at the helm of the Hawkeyes, and then with Brenda being at Maryland since 2004. 2005? They won the national title in 2007.
In that ballpark.
Yes, I believe my numbers are correct. Don't quote me on that. I know Rutgers went to the national title game in 2007. That much I do know, and I think... Okay, we move on. What's our dessert for this week's table, Mitch?
The dessert is going to be the game that I'm going to be at in Charlotte at the Spectrum Center. It's Sunday at 3:00 on ESPN. It's the Ally tip-off. I already talked about it a little bit earlier, but number 1 South Carolina versus number 9 NC State. This is a rematch of the Final Four game last year. This is the second annual Ally tip-off. This is one of 2 games that are going to be in the Spectrum Center on Sunday. The other one is going to be a really good game too. It just features, 2 unranked teams in Iowa and Virginia Tech. But I think that, the Gamecocks and the Wolfpack are going to give us a really good game, and I think it's going to be a different game. But I'm excited to see, Tessa Johnson and Isaiah James and Sanaya Rivers and Raven Johnson, all go at each other and get some threes up, and we'll see what happens.
I also can't help but feel like that second game, the fact that it's between unranked opponents, is, I think, in large part because we don't know what those 2 outfits are going to look like, especially Virginia Tech sans Kenny Brooks. And I think with Iowa, it goes without saying, we all know why people are saying, well, we don't know what they are without Caitlin Clark. I know, myself included, there were moments last year that I would watch Iowa games and I would say, my God, it's Caitlin Clark dragging a bunch of 2 stars and 3 stars and just trying to get them to literally by just sheer will to get them to the national championship game. With that said, though, Hannah Stolke needs to be in the conversation as an all Big Ten performer once again. Lucy Olson coming over from Villanova is obviously a storyline so many people are watching. She was one of the most sought-after transfers in the portal this offseason. And I got to give credit to Sita Falter, man. She may be the most underrated, steady 3-and-D player in the Big Ten. She'll probably play a little bit more of the 4 just because of the players that they have on the roster this year. Although I'm curious to see where Jada Giamfi, social media extraordinaire of the University of Iowa, curious to see where she kind of factors into that rotation as well, because she is a bigger player. And so she can kind of play the 4 or 3. She's a wing. I don't know. Very curious to see where she slots into this whole thing because they do have a lot of shooters back as well. So I think that'll be a good game. It's just that the identity of both those teams way different than when this game was booked over a year ago.
I think Iowa is a top 25 team. I voted for them in my preseason poll. I think, you mentioned Syla Swords, like she was huge for them down the stretch last season when they needed her in the NCAA tournament.
Junkyard dog, baby.
Yeah, Hannah Stalkey, we saw, 40 plus points that one night. Lucy Olson lit it up in the Big East last year. I think they're going to beat Virginia Tech, and they might be ranked last week. They were, just outside the AP Top 25 poll in the preseason. So, if a team loses here or there, they might sneak into next week's poll.
So your appetizer this week, folks, is on Thursday at 7 p.m. on the Big Ten Network Plus. Harvard at number 25, Indiana. Speaking of great 3 and D players, there's a lot of great wings out there in Indiana. I think they're going to be able to shoot the leather off the ball this year. Number 11, Duke at number 18, Maryland is the main course, folks. That is Sunday at 1 p.m. on FS1. And stick around for the dessert. Number 1, South Carolina. And number 9, NC State. Before we put a bow on this week's episode, Mitch, last call, shout outs, closeouts, plugs. I know you mentioned we may have updates on when your book is coming out or maybe not. But for those who are unfamiliar, remind us where they can find your stuff and, of course, that upcoming book.
Yeah, no updates on the book yet. But when I have a date, you guys will have a date. And I will make sure that you guys are tuned into that. Again, I followed North Carolina around all last season from the preseason all the way up until their second round NCAA tournament loss to South Carolina. So that'll be in, a season with style book that comes out hopefully in the next couple months, but I'll let you know exactly when. The only other thing I have to plug, at For the Win, I wrote about Haley Cavender's return to college basketball after, 590 days. Why she, initially came back to TCU and then transferred to Miami, and how she's sort of settling in with the new look Hurricanes, or maybe the old look Hurricanes. You mentioned her and Jasmine Roberts, starters on that Elite 8 team. So super interested to see what they can do this season. And you can find me on Twitter at Primetime Mitch, where I'm covering all sorts of stuff these days.
Yeah, it's a great read, folks. Make sure you take some time to read it on For the Win. I know I did, and I want to commend Mitch that he was able to discuss the Cavender twins. Of course, the brief stay at TCU by one Haley Cavender before Hannah Cavender came back, and we did not once have to hear about their famous boyfriends at both the University of Georgia and the Dallas Cowboys. So thank you for that, Mitch, because in these parts up here in North Florida, anytime you mention the Cavender twins these days, it's, Carson Beck. And it's, I don't know if you want to be saying Carson Beck's name after that multi-interception performance at the cocktail party this weekend.
Yeah. Unfamiliar with the work of their boyfriends.
Yes. No, we don't know them. This is the women's basketball podcast for a reason, folks.
The Dallas Cowboys, you said? I don't know who they are.
Yeah, I don't know. Are they a cowboy? Do they ride bulls? I'm just kidding. I will be on the call tomorrow night. My first play-by-play of the season is the JU women's basketball team hosting Edward Waters here in Jacksonville for their home opener. Also going to be calling some volleyball on Friday as well. And, of course, keeping you abreast. Yeah, it's going to be my second time ever calling volleyball. So we'll see how that goes. Should be a lot of fun. But excited to see what Special Jennings has in store for her second season at JU. She was highly regarded during her time at Montverde Academy, high school, number 1 high school program in the country, coach of the year, accolades out the wazoo. How they've attacked building that program has perhaps been a little non-traditional with her and several of her staffers coming from the high school ranks, but they're killing it on the trail. They also are really killing it in keeping girls in Jacksonville, getting some of the best local talent and keeping them in the city of Jacksonville. And so it's really exciting to see, and excited to see what the Dolphins look like tomorrow night. And of course, we'll have all the latest coming up next week right here on the Women's Basketball Podcast. Anything else, Mitch, before we head out?
Shout out to the Dolphins.
Shout out to the Dolphins. Lemoyne, JU, shout out to the MAC. This has been MAC. We're going to need a sound effect, Dimitri, when you listen back to this. This has been the Women's Basketball Podcast. We will catch you next week.